The Arabian Racehorse Podcast with Debbie Burst.
Hello, and welcome to the new season's Arabian Racing Podcast. We have a new guest this year in Stephen Molyneux. Stephen, hello.
Hi, Debbie. How are you?
Yeah, very well. Stephen's out in Dubai. You will probably have seen him on the Dubai Racing Channel, but he's also our Arrow handicapper. But Stephen started off working for Timeform. So, Stephen, perhaps if you'd like to explain a little bit about how your career path has led you to this point.
Yeah, well, I was at Timeform for about 14 years, I think it was. And the last year I was there, I think Graham Walcroft was the previous handicapper. He'd left, and the ARO came to Timeform as a company to look for a new handicapper to go forward. And I think by association, because I'd worked in Dubai at the end of the 1990s, they just landed it on my desk, so to speak, and I've been doing it ever since. So yeah, hopefully I've been doing a good enough job to keep going for a while yet. And
can you just explain a little bit, for your system of handicapping, you use the same system that you used and learnt at Timeform, is that right?
Yeah, basically the editor there at the time, obviously a very well-respected person in the industry, a guy called Simon Rowlands. He came up with just a very basic handicapping system that they use for thoroughbreds. Obviously, it's tinkered in terms of pounds per length for the Arabians. But yeah, it's all very basic. I use an Excel spreadsheet, stick all the weights, ratings, distances beaten in, etc. And just, yeah, very much, the ARO wants to be as close to the thoroughbreds as they can. So there's no reason for the handicapping to be too much different from that, really.
Of course. And moving forward, obviously you're now out in Dubai. How long have you been there for now?
So 7 years. I got a job working for Dubai Racing Channel as a producer / presenter, jack of all trades, master of none. And obviously at the time, Jenny Haynes asked if I would carry it forward. And so I've continued to do it. I know there's probably a few people that wonder how it can be done remotely and why the handicapper isn't on course, which, I will admit is probably not ideal on a day-to-day basis. But, I think in the days of modern technology, etc., you see more on YouTube watching the race anyway. The only aspect of it I miss out on is not being able to see the horses in the parade ring and maybe assessing how fit they are. But I think if you look at the BHA handicapping now anyway, they've got a team of 15, 16, and I'd say they all work from home, particularly in these COVID times. So for all the fact I'm about 5,000 miles away from the action, I hope it doesn't impede too much on what I do.
Mm-hmm. And so obviously you've just finished the winter season in Dubai with the racing. Mm-hmm. And of course, Dubai is slightly different because their championships include purebred Arabian results side by side along with thoroughbreds. So in actual fact, we've had a very unusual situation for the rest of the world in that the leading owner for the last 4 out of 5 years, Khalid Khalifa Al Nabuda, has done that with Arabians. How do you assess that in terms of a sort of global situation?
Yeah, it's fairly unique, isn't it? But I think it works side by side. There's a similar number of thoroughbred races compared to Arabian races, and there's absolutely no stopping the thoroughbred trainers training Arabians. Doug Watson, for example, who is the closest pursuer to Ernst Ortel in the trainer's title this year, he will have had not as many Arabians for sure, but he's certainly got around about half a dozen. And similarly, Shadwell and His Highness Sheikh Hamdan, who would have been the closest pursuer to Khalid Khalifa Al Nabuda, he would have had both thoroughbreds and Arabians as well. So no, it works. I think it works very well. I think there's equal opportunity for both, and I think if you were to speak to the likes of Ernst Ortel and Eric Lamartinel, who would be the two leading Arabian trainers over here with no thoroughbreds in their yard, I think they'd be a little bit disappointed and disgusted almost if the trainer's title was to become separate. So, and indeed the owner's title. So no, it's been competitive. I think you look at owners' championships all over the world, and invariably they're dominated by one or two powerhouses, and that's the case really with Khalid Khalifa Al Nabuda over here. He's got 70 to 80 horses with Ernst Ortel on a yearly basis, and a few with outside trainers. So I think we should be, commending his breeding operation for the success that he's had, rather than be too critical of him dominating the Owners' Championship.
I agree with that. And obviously a relevant point for us in the UK about the breeding, which is, of course, a horse of his breeding, AF Albarak, is standing in the UK. I should just point out he's available for natural cover, not for AI. So that's why it is important that he's in the UK this year under the Shadwell Stallions banner. He, of course, has already got a Kahala Classic winner in AF Mayer, who won 2 years ago. And he very nearly got another one this year with AF Al Jawel. Obviously, that was a horse considered very much to be more of a sprinter than being able to get the 2,000-metre trip of the Dubai Kahala Classic. However, Tad nearly pinched it, didn't he, at the end? He
did. As the season went on, they kind of drew his stamina out, obviously, with the intentions of getting towards the Kahala Classic. But, Ernst Ortel trains a lot of speed into his horses. He wins a lot of the races by them just being very professional and up with the pace, etc. So there perhaps was a stamina doubt over AF Albajel, but AF Albarak's proven to be a phenomenal stallion over here. I think it was probably about 2 years ago that he went back to the UK, and there's been a notable, I wouldn't say decline, but Ernst Ortel's younger horses perhaps haven't been as potent over the last 2 years as they have prior to AF Albarak leaving Dubai, and that's probably no coincidence.
One, I think, is registered. The other two are just taking their time a bit, the two colts. But the filly certainly looks a nice individual, and hopefully we'll see her out this year. She's called Sultana, and obviously she'll be running under the Shadwell Estates banner. And just to go back to the Kahala Classic, the winner there was Durayan, a horse I think that Connections thought was very much a bridle horse. He had a string of second places in group races. Finally got his act together last summer out in France, getting his first Group 1 race. I think when I spoke to Thierry, the racing manager there, he was very grateful for Eritz Mendizabal getting a good relationship with the horse and delivering him right at the end, which is pretty much what he did in the Kahala Classic, isn't it?
Well, yeah, and very, very difficult to pull off on the dirt, particularly around Meydan. But yeah, he's running in the Saudi equivalent had been eye-catching to a degree because, as you mentioned, he went off. He was on the bridle a long way up with the pace, which, as things transpired, it was obviously too strong a pace, and he had nothing left to give him. In the Kahala Classic itself, he very nearly stopped once hitting the front. AF Al-Wajel did get something of a second wind, and. But no, it was a phenomenal performance really to have crept around the way he did, and the thing with the Arabians at Meydan, the fields do get well strung out from a reasonably early stage, so he was able to creep into it, and it was an excellent performance. It was what looked to be a strong race on paper, I thought beforehand. There's obviously a few disappointing performances, a few horses that didn't stay, but I got the impression he was Yas Racing's main contender going into the race, and he proved it as such. It was a very good winner, and as we've already alluded to, the horse in second is a very progressive young horse. So good strong race. As I think we've seen for most of the Group 1s over here, really, the likes of Samud, who's been dominant at Abu Dhabi on the grass, and the Dual Crown winner back in December, I think it was, Messi, who unfortunately we've not seen since due to injury, but he was a nice story to that race, and yeah, we've seen some very good Group 1 horses over here.
And looking forward to our own Group 1 races later this year. There's a strong possibility that Durayan may get aimed for the Goodwood race, Qatar International Stakes over a mile. That looks like it probably quite suit him well. Yeah,
exactly. A strong pace at the mile. We know likely that Julian Smart will have a couple lined up for that, and Albin Demille, I'm sure, as well. So I suppose the one disappointing aspect of that race is that we've not really had a strong horse from the UK yet, but hopefully that will change in the not too distant future. But I could see him whizzing around Goodwood, enjoying himself, and he'll certainly be a very high quality contender in that.
Yes, well, that's something to look forward to later on. Back to our domestic season now, which starts on Wednesday at Wolverhampton. It's a 7 furlong maiden sponsored by Wafba Stallions, and we've got 10 runners, which I think is a good field for our opening race. Most of them obviously are going to be debutantes. We've got a couple in there that have already had runs before. Have you had a chance to look at the race at all?
I had a quick look through. Yeah, I was quite pleased at the entry stage to see. I think it was 5 horses with ratings, which obviously makes rating a maiden that much easier. But unfortunately, 4 of those haven't declared, and the only one with a rating, Kay Melian. All due respect to Jen Harris, the trainer of that one, it's unlikely that that she'll be troubling the Drudge rated just 40. So as ever at this time of year, it's a case of the young and exciting horses potentially, and I'm sure James Owen and Phil Collington are likely to dominate the event, as they quite often do this type. And yeah, it'd be just good to get going, really. I think it was it September last year when everything got going. So the fact we're racing the first week in May is excellent, or the last week in April as it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we've got James's yard is already in great form. He's had a winner pointing and a winner hunter chasing, both ridden by Alex Chadwick in the last 7 days. So you'd have to give his stable certainly a good consideration. Aldana is probably the likely favourite. She surprisingly actually made her debut in Belgium last year, coming second at Glyn, which I think obviously shows that she's a pretty professional for a 3-year-old to stand travelling as a filly, I would think.
Yeah, that's definitely an angle that James well used last year, isn't it? The standard of racing in Belgium is, I would say, difficult to assess. Certainly hasn't made my life easy over the last 12 months with James having plenty of runners. Maybe Brexit's come to my aid to a degree and cut down that particular avenue. But I think it's a tight track over there, and it's obviously an artificial surface that they race on. So that horse will have similar conditions in place at Wolverhampton. And as we know, with any maiden, any horse with experience, it's likely to have them in good stead. James's other horse, or one of his other horses, Algadir's, also had the benefit of a run, albeit he looked very green on his debut, and perhaps he's going to be a little bit too green once again. So yeah, maybe the other horse that we just mentioned there from James's yard is the one to beat, Aldana. And
just going back to Algadir, actually, he's been gelded, I believe, since that run. You can see why they obviously persevered, because he's very well bred. He's by De Hesse out of Al Marwa, who's a half sister to Al Mortages. So that's a very similar breeding. So you'd obviously you'd want to give him every chance to prove himself as a racehorse, as a full horse. But obviously he's not been keeping his mind on the job, and has had to pay the penalty in real terms. So I mean, I think, on his breeding, certainly if he's more focused on racing, he'll probably give Aldana the most to do. Of Phil's, I sort of, in the back of my mind, I thought that Phil wasn't one for having early 3-year-old runners. But then when I went through some stats, and actually he's got nearly a 50% strike rate with his placed horses with his 3-year-old debutant. So I noticed Alain Moir, he's got there with blinkers on for the first time out. So he might have that one at least ready to get into the places.
Yeah, they get a good weight allowance as well, don't they? £10 off
Exactly.
the 4-year-olds, which is a big help. And with the 3-year-olds, obviously the aim is to get to the 3-year-old race on Dubai Day, and there's very few opportunities. I think we've got one 3-year-old only race between now and the end of June. And I know with Arabians, is it much of a big deal? 3-year-olds taking on their elders? It's the equivalent of a 2-year-old thoroughbred taking on a 3-year-old, which you wouldn't necessarily consider. But with the Arabians, I'm not sure it's too much of a difference. So yeah, hopefully he's just going to get going and get him going early, get that experience into him, and maybe prove good enough to get to Dubai Day. Obviously, Phil only had the one winner last year, victim of the circumstances surrounding COVID, no doubt, as many trainers were. So he'll be looking to get the season going quite early. Just another quick word on that, on Algadir, who you mentioned there for James as well. He actually finished behind a horse called Big Oar, 7 lengths behind at Wolverhampton, who came out to Dubai and ran second last week in the final meeting of the season. So we've seen 2 or 3 good horses come from England last season and perform with great credit in Dubai this year, including Durgam Afbar, who was the Arabian Derby winner.
It was, I asked Phil actually whether he was likely to come back to the UK this year, and I suspect not, unfortunately. I think
I think I had the same word with his new trainer over here, Mohammed Dagash. He could have run in the last week of the season, and he was like, no, I'm saving him for next season. So I think that's bad news for Phil, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, but it's still good for UK racing to have a horse of that quality start off over here. And it shows that we still offer an opportunity for nicely bred horses to learn their trade in the UK before moving on to the Gulf States for the winter.
Yeah, we don't really see enough of it to a degree. I think there's a few horses that probably go the other way that have had their limitations exposed in Dubai and go the other way. But yeah, like I say, two or three that have been in England last season. Jagunther Al-Manlai, of course, who ran second in the Derby, he was placed in a prep race for the President's Cup and then rather hung his chance away in a couple of Group 1s after that. Jagunther de Monlai, I beg your pardon. And yeah, there's been a couple, like I say, Durgam Afbari. I rated him, I think it was 85 after 2 runs here. But because he'd never won a race, the UAE handicapper didn't give him a mark. And then he ran 3 times over there before he got a mark, and he was rated 60, I think it was, after that 3rd run. And on the back of that, the Arabian Derby win, he's now rated 85. So could have saved himself about 5 or 6 runs and just give him the mark that I gave him. But each jurisdiction has their different rules, and but it was good to see him win because he'd come up against some good horses prior to that victory at Abu Dhabi. And
so, as we say, we've got plenty to look forward to. We're starting off with our first race on Wednesday, and then after that, we'll have our first handicap. So first chance for you to see where your ratings stand for this season after horses have matured over the winter a bit more at Bath on the 3rd of May. So
yeah, it's never easy, really. I always try and factor in the younger horses improving when rating them from maidens. Not to a great degree, so I'm only talking a few pounds, but obviously a younger horse, 4 or 5 year old's going to have that bit more potential than an older handicapper. But yeah, the handicaps are certainly a lot easier to rate, and good prize money as well, isn't there? From what I've seen so far from the racing calendar, the race on a couple of days' time is worth £4,000, which is certainly not to be sniffed at. I'm sure there's a few people rather regretting they didn't have their maidens ready that bit earlier.
You'd like to think so, wouldn't you, Stephen? But I think COVID obviously has quite a lot to do with the situation with people hanging back this season, and that's fair enough, isn't it? At the end of the day, but hopefully, as you say, prize money of that level for what is still essentially for this season, at any rate, a partially amateur sport. At any rate, certainly at the lower levels, you'd like to think that it would encourage a few more people. But anyway, we'll rejoin and review the situation after our race on Wednesday, and look forward to our first handicap on the 3rd of May.
Yeah, just be good to get going and hopefully see some very competitive racing. Wish everyone all the best.
Indeed. So thank you very much, Stephen, and we'll see you next week.
No problem.